All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Nick. I'm the NYC Beekeeper, and I'm back for another Ask a Beekeeper this month for June 2023. We're going to get started here in just a moment once I get some of my settings set. Tonight, we're going to bounce around on a few different topics that I thought might be interesting. We've got to talk a little bit about swarming, since we've had some exciting swarm activity here in New York City, around the Times Square area in particular. I've got a few stories of my own with a few swarms this year. And then I'd also like to talk about, our nectar flow. We're on our nectar flow right now, and it's that time of year in New York City because this is really the main flow that we get. So it's not something that we can just wait and get the next one, because this is it till next season for the most part. So if you are joining for the first time, the way these work is that I've got a list of topics that I can go off of, and I've got some questions that people have submitted. But if you do have any questions yourself, this is a live format. You can actually comment if you're watching on Facebook. You can comment. You can jump in the chat if you're watching on YouTube. Unfortunately, if you're on LinkedIn, you won't be able to participate live with me. So you can jump over to one of the other platforms to try to do that. So you can ask your questions. We can go off on tangents and different things like that. But yeah, otherwise, we'll just kind of go down my list and talk about some things. If you are on the live, I'd love for you to post a comment, just letting me know where you're watching from, just so we can see what's going on. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about this evening is going to be specific to the New York City area, obviously, because that's where I am based and that's where I keep bees. A lot of this stuff will pertain to beekeeping anywhere. It just might be a little bit different time of season, or you might be dealing with things just a little bit different. But beekeeping, from New York City to the suburbs to more rural areas, there's a lot of stuff that overlaps, and hopefully you'll be able to take something away, even if you're not in an urban area. All right. So there's been several interesting things that have happened in the recent weeks, the recent month. The number one thing that has been viral and going around all over social media, I don't know how many times it's been sent to me, but we had someone captured some great video of a swarm that was happening in Times Square, which was really exciting. I'm sure if you saw it live, it was very exciting. But this is something that happens in nature. This is a natural behavior of the bees, and it's not anything that is a sign of the end times or civilization collapsing or anything like that. It just happens to be a big to-do when it happens on such a big stage like Times Square. But if you don't know what a swarm is and why the bees did that, I'm going to talk through a few steps here and kind of explain it in kind of broad terms. So a swarm is just essentially how a colony reproduces. So on an individual level, the queen lays eggs, and new bees develop from those eggs. So that's on a very individual scale, how one bee turns into many bees. But in a forest, you can imagine if there's a colony that moves into the edge of a forest where there's no other bees, how do bees eventually populate the forest? And the way they do that is that typically in the springtime, they build up their forces inside of the tree that they're in, and at a certain point, they have not enough space for all the bees that are there. So they're going to start going through a process of preparing to send off a swarm. What they do is they go around, they start looking for eggs that they can actually turn into new queens, because with a swarm, the old queen and half the population approximately leaves. So when they are swarming, I should step back a little bit. When they are looking for those eggs, they're planning to produce new queens, and those queens will eventually uh, uh, fight one another if they both emerge at the same time, or if the first one emerges, she'll go around and start killing off the other queens, and she'll be the new queen. At that point, the old queen has already left with her half of the population, and that's what we see on the news. We see that swarm flying through the air. We see them collecting on the side of a building or on the side of a car or hanging from a tree branch, and this is how we. This is kind of like just like a pit stop for the bees until they find a new home. So out in the forest, they would be looking for a new tree, some other cavity to go into and start a new hive, start building comb, and continue right from there. But in a city, there's not a whole lot of great places to go to, and a lot of those places end up being the walls of buildings. They might try to go into a water meter cover on the ground. They can go into all kinds of empty cavities as long as it's an appropriate size and it's more or less protected. So when you see these bees buzzing around in Manhattan, a lot of times these are coming from managed hives, and the beekeeper has either fallen behind the curve as far as keeping up with the bees and giving them more space, or sometimes the bees just build up so fast that you don't even realize that they're preparing to swarm. And if you go out 1 week and check them, they don't look like they're swarming. And if you go out 2.5 weeks later, they may have already swarmed, because it only takes them about 2 weeks to actually go through that whole process of deciding to swarm, preparing to swarm, and then swarming. So it's something that they do in urban areas, especially. We try to manage it so that we're not sending off swarms and terrifying people, or having people come into unnecessary contact with the bees and get stung. That isn't a good story for anybody, especially beekeepers. So generally, beekeepers in urban areas, New York City beekeepers in particular, are very good about monitoring their hives and preventing them from swarming. So you might ask, how do you stop that from happening? How do you keep those bees from just leaving and causing a big scene? Well, the main way is to always be adding space to your hive so that you're able to, or I should say that they're able to continue to grow and they don't feel constrained. When they start feeling tight and congested, that's a perfect time for them to start wanting to prepare to swarm. One thing I didn't mention actually in the whole process of swarming that's kind of interesting. The queen, who has wings just like the rest of the bees in the hive, her wings are about the same size as the rest of the bees. However, her body, in some instances, is about twice as long as the worker bees. So generally, she can't fly under her own power. She is just too heavy. Her body's making eggs and she can't fly. So what she's got to do in that 2 week time that they're preparing to swarm and that they're making new queens is that she will actually stop laying eggs at a certain point, and she will go through this process of losing a little weight. And it's mainly due to how the bees around her, her attendants, are feeding her. They will definitely put her on a little bit of a diet. And they'll also chase her around the hive, which gives her a little exercise and helps her lose a little bit of weight so that she's actually able to fly. So she's going to go out and fly. The colony, half the population is going to follow her. And when a beekeeper goes out to pick up a swarm, the key for us is to find and capture the queen, because once we do that, the colony will follow. They're not following immediately, but they do want to stay with her. Her scent, her pheromone is what kind of keeps them all together. And so if we can get the queen into a box, we can actually have all the other bees follow right into the box. And it's actually quite mesmerizing to see this phenomenon of bees marching into a box, kind of just like you would go into a concert hall, everybody kind of filing in and going in. There's some great videos on YouTube that you can find of beekeepers doing this, where they find the queen, they put her in the box, and then they just allow the bees to go in. If you've seen the video that was from Times Square this past week, you might have noticed that the beekeeper was actually using a straight edge of some kind to scrape the bees into a box. They are hoping that when they're doing that the queen will end up falling in the box, and then the bees will follow her in. And as they do that, a lot of times you do get the queen to go in. Sometimes the queen will buzz around and fly, and then the swarm flies away or flies to a different area, and you got to start all over again. So if you can catch that queen while she's out, you put her in a little cage, or even just put her in a box where she's on some comb, and a lot of times she'll stay, and the other bees will all want to follow her wherever she goes. So it's a really interesting kind of natural behavior that happens, and it's really cool to watch. It's really cool to be around. If you're an aspiring beekeeper or a new beekeeper, it is very tempting to just see a swarm and decide that you're going to go grab it. So I would recommend that if that happens to you and you've never caught a swarm before, to find a more experienced beekeeper. Hopefully you have someone that you can call a mentor, or at least someone who's caught a swarm before that you can reach out to and go catch it together. Because there's a lot of timing and making sure you've got the right equipment and the right things with you when you're going to catch a swarm, that just make it a lot cleaner, a lot easier, and you won't cause any issues, especially for any pedestrians standing around who are watching you. We want to avoid causing any issues where people can get stung. So find someone who can do it with you, and go out and try to catch a swarm. It's generally it's good free bees. On occasion you'll get a colony that might be a little sick, so there is a bit of a risk to it. You may not want to bring it right back into your apiary where you keep your bees, but maybe you can bring it back to a space where it can kind of quarantine for a little bit and make sure that they're looking good and their mites are low, and then you can actually bring it back to your apiary and you have a new hive. If you do see a swarm and you're not a beekeeper, the best thing to do is to contact your local beekeeping association. Most towns, most cities have some sort of bee club. Sometimes even counties have a bee club, and you can reach out. Most of the time they have a swarm list on their website. So they have a list of beekeepers who are willing to come pick up swarms. Some even have a list of beekeepers that are willing to remove established hives from a structure. So you can go on, find a beekeeper, work your way down the list until you find someone who could come out. There are a lot of beekeepers who do it as a hobby or just do it on the side, and they'll come out and just pick up the swarm for free, just for the bees. There's a lot of beekeepers who do this as a full-time job, and they charge a fee for it. Both ways are good ways. I would say if a beekeeper does come and remove a swarm off your property for free, it's always a nice thing to give them a little money for gas money and for tolls. That is always helpful, because the bees, it's always great to have extra bees and to have a new colony, but those colonies don't always work out. Sometimes they're too small, or you get them back in the box and the queen gets damaged, and then you don't have a queen anymore. Or the colony, you install them in a perfectly fine hive, and for one reason or another, they fly away again. So the bees themselves aren't always the compensation for the beekeeper. A lot of people do it as a passion, and if someone helps you out, it's always nice to throw a little something their way. But the last thing I want to mention about swarms is that while it does look scary and it does look chaotic out there when a swarm happens, the bees are very much in one of their more gentle or docile states. They have no babies to protect. They have no resources or food to protect. They have no hive to protect. It's just them. They're just looking for a home, and there's no reason for them to sting you unless they're provoked. So if they're buzzing around and you're swatting, or you're jumping around erratically, or running around through the swarm, that might be a time when one of the bees gets a little nervous around you and stings. But otherwise, the swarm is very calm. It looks crazy, but as soon as they land, they're very gentle. And many beekeepers, and there are some famous ones in particular, will go and catch swarms without any gear, because they're just that gentle to be around. As a beekeeper, I always recommend to have at least a veil on when you're doing this, because you never know what can happen, and some bees have different personalities than others. But it just goes to show you that they're not out to sting you. They're not out to do anything bad to you. They just are looking for a home, and they don't want to be provoked. So yeah, take that as you will. I really love one of the things I've heard recently from my beekeeping friend, Mandy Shaw. She runs the podcast Beekeeper Confidential, as well as being a beekeeper out on the West Coast. But she describes swarms as the birth of a new colony. It's literally a baby colony that is now out in the world and doing its thing. So it's really great, and I think it's I think it's awesome if the bees can swarm. If you're in a urban area, maybe not so much, but it's not meant to be a scary thing. So let's see here. So moving on, here in New York City, as I mentioned earlier, we are on our nectar flow. If you don't know what a nectar flow is, this is the time of the year that the main source of nectar is blooming for our bees. So in other places, it might happen 2 or 3 or 4 times during the year. In more urban areas, you're only going to have a few flows, if at all, because of just the reduced forage. New York City has a lot of green space. We have a lot of trees in the sidewalks. There is a lot out there for the bees. However, we don't have these, we don't have miles and miles of forest. We don't have lots and lots of meadows around. So the bees really, they get in when we have our main nectar flow, and then the rest of the year we are hoping that nectar flow was enough for the bees. If not, we'll get a little secondary one in the fall, and typically that's one that I leave on for the bees. I don't harvest from that one, just so that they can fill out any gaps that they might have in their food stores for the winter. So here in New York City, our nectar flow is the linden tree. That is our main nectar flow. There are other things that start a little bit earlier and a little bit later, but the nectar flow is that's what gives us kind of our signature very light yellow honey, kind of citrusy a little bit, with a nice minty aftertaste, which is a hallmark of linden honey. We would not call our honey here in the city linden because there's also lots of other things that are blooming at the same time, and we don't know that our bees are only going to the linden trees. So there is probably a lot of other things in the honey that are not linden. So we would call it a wildflower, and that's what honey is called all around the anywhere you go where the bees or where the beekeeper doesn't know exactly what the bees are foraging on. Then you go to wildflower honey. So wildflower is not one thing. It depends on the location, it depends on the season, and it can be different from town to town and state to state and so on. So while ours is very light here, I have some friends upstate who make a much darker wildflower honey, and it's just a different combination of florals that the bees are going to. For our kind of nectar flow, June is the month when we get blooms. I saw linden trees just starting to bloom here in Astoria in Queens last week. So they're about a week, maybe a week and a half into their bloom. And I've been hearing from other beekeepers in Brooklyn and Staten Island that the bloom had been started for a week already before ours actually bloomed. So hopefully we'll get a good one. Hopefully we'll have plenty of food coming in for the bees, and then a little extra for us to bottle and sell ourselves. It is key to add honey supers and be ahead of what the bees are bringing in. So for your brood nest, for the brood boxes, generally the rule is about 70 when it's about 70% full. So in a 10 frame box, when you have about 7 frames of bees, in a 8 frame box when you have about 6 frames of bees, it's a good time to add a new box because they're going to need it with all of the brood that's emerging. In the honey supers, the honey flow or the nectar flow can happen so fast that a lot of places will say when the box is about 60% used or 60% full, then to add another honey super so that you're staying ahead of the bees. As soon as the bees don't have space to lay or to store honey in the top of the hive, they'll actually start storing it down in the brood nest, which will cause the queen to feel congested, and she may stop laying and the hive may decide that it's time to swarm. So we will likely see more swarms over the next few weeks as beekeepers are out there who are maybe not getting to their hives as often enough for the month of June, and there will be hives that swarm just because they started packing all the honey down in the brood nest. This is typically called being honey bound, and the only way to fix this is to add more space to the brood nest so that the queen has somewhere to lay, and to catch this early. If they start preparing to swarm before you realize what's going on, it's a 50-50 shot to try to keep them in the box. Sometimes when they decide that they're swarming, they're going to swarm no matter what you do. So it's important. In June, I typically am trying to visit my hives about every 10 days, maybe once a week, depending on when the flow starts and what I'm seeing in my hives. If it seems like it's coming in real fast, then I might go around more frequently just to make sure that they have space. So I see Tom commented, watching him scrape the swarm off that skyscraper glass was awesome. It is definitely awesome to think about how we can, you've got this crazy ball of all these stinging insects flying around, and we can just kind of physically push them into a box and they'll stay. And it's a weird thing. It's not so weird for me anymore, but it is a weird thing to think about how we kind of can tap into this animal and do things with it that just don't seem possible when you're looking at it from the outside. But there's a lot of things we can do with the bees. We can manipulate them in different ways. We can kind of attempt different techniques with the idea that we know information about them and we know kind of how they'll react or behave when we do these things. So as you start learning more and more about the bees and about beekeeping, you start finding all of these little shortcuts and the shorthand that beekeepers use to manage their hives and to get the hives to do what they want. Generally, the bees are still wild animals. They're not domesticated, so it's difficult to really put a bee in a box and tell them that they have to stay there. However, there are things we can do to kind of guide them that way, and so really that's all we are guides to for the bees. Ultimately, they do what they're going to do. So yeah, we talked about swarms. We talked a little bit about what's happening right now. The other thing too is that I feel like every month it's good to talk about the pests and disease that you may see in the hive at this time of year. So for us here in the city, we are generally seeing pretty low mite counts, and that's varroa mites. There are some hives that I've seen or that I've heard about that have had mites that were they had infestation levels above the threshold that we set, and they need to be treated at this point. I think that typically is happening with overwintered hives, because if they haven't been treated yet and they've had varroa that are living with them all winter long, then as they're building up, the varroa are building up too. For new hives, new colonies, hopefully you're getting your bees from a reputable source and that they're coming in healthy and without significant varroa issues. And so generally packages are going to be pretty clean. It's always good to treat them when you install them and make sure that they are as clean as they can be now, because every mite that you can kill now is going to be killing 10 or 20 or 30 mites in the future. Their population explodes so much in the late summer that anything you can do now is going to pay dividends later. For your monitoring, if you can do it monthly, that's the best thing. Alcohol washes are my recommendation. You can also do what's called a sugar roll with powdered sugar. However, in my view, this is one of the more or the less humane ways to do it. You do have living bees at the end of a sugar roll, but they've got to be shaken so much that there's no way that they're not damaged inside their exoskeletons. Whereas with an alcohol wash, you are killing the sample of bees that you're taking, but it's a quick kill, and you're getting a more precise number of or count on your mites. So more mites are falling off the bees, and you have a better idea of what your mite levels are. So if you look at this not as killing 300 bees in your sample, but taking a little biopsy or a little tissue sample of the superorganism or the full animal that is the colony of bees, then it makes it a lot more justified, and it makes it easier to actually kill those bees. Beekeepers, no matter who you are, we don't get into this to kill the bees. That's the last thing that we do. That's kind of the bane of our existence when we have to purchase new bees in the spring. We have a hive that doesn't make it through the winter, so nobody likes to kill bees. But we're sacrificing a few so that the many can survive, and the many can thrive, not just survive. So definitely, if you don't know how to do an alcohol wash, there are plenty of resources, plenty of videos on YouTube. I always point people to the Honeybee Health Coalition. This is a fabulous resource that has just a ton of information and videos about every kind of mite treatment, every way to count mites. uh, it's just like the one source that I send everybody to and that I follow myself. So you should check them out if you don't know about them. Again, it's the Honeybee Health Coalition, and I think it's honeybeehealthcoalition.org where you can go. I believe they have a resources tab, and there's all these varroa mite resources where they have a decision management tool where you answer a few questions, and then it tells you what kind of treatments that you can apply to your hive at the time of the season that you're doing it. They've got a whole PDF that goes through and tells you all the information for every treatment and how to use it and the efficacy. And for anyone who wants to nerd out on all of those specs for all the different treatments that are out there, that's a great guide. And then again, they also have all these videos that walk you through specifically how to use each treatment that is available, and then also how to do your mite counts. They do the alcohol wash, the sugar roll, and I believe they also do something called an ether roll, where they're actually spraying a bit of, I think it's brake fluid. There's something that they're spraying in to kill the bees and to get the mites to drop off the bees. It's not a method that I use, so I don't know specifically, but I'm sure they describe it in detail in their video. But yeah, that's a great resource to check out if you are thinking about how to manage your bees and manage the pests and disease that go along with them. For some people, if you are further in the south, you may be dealing with the mites already building up. You may be dealing with other pests like small hive beetles. Those are things that, again, if you can take care of them earlier in the season, if you can get rid of as many as you can right now, later in the season you will not be dealing with such big problems. You might even nip it in the bud right now and not have to really deal with it this season. I know for some beekeepers there's just no getting around small hive beetle down south, so that's something that you just might have to manage as you go through the season. But testing, checking your mite counts regularly. If you're not doing it monthly, at least try to do it 3 or 4 times during the year. And then if you do need to treat, meaning that your mite count is above a certain threshold, then do a test, find what the mite count is, do your treatment, and then at the end do another mite count to see if your treatment was actually effective. There's too many beekeepers that put on treatments and just assume that it's fine, or they just treat prophylactically. And if you're trying to do the best method, those are not the best methods. So if you're gonna do this, do the count, do the treatment, do the count again, and see if it actually worked. If it didn't, you either need to retreat with the same treatment, or find another treatment that works at that time of the year. And if you have honey on or not, if the temperatures are right, there's all these different things that can change and force you to use different types of treatments. So again, the Honeybee Health Coalition has a great decision management tool that tells you, based on asking a few different questions, it tells you exactly what you can use and how you should use it to go through that. Let's see here. So I'm going to go through maybe a few more things here. I don't know if we're going to go the full hour this evening, but some important things that have happened just in the last month. Here in New York City, it's mandatory to submit a letter of notice to the city to let them know that you have hives, how many hives you have, and the location or the address where you have them. You also have to submit your contact information. This is so in case there's any complaints or in case there's any issues with the bees around your area, the city can get in touch with you. They can figure out what's going on, and it typically is just fine. There are a lot of metro areas that do require some sort of registration or notice from the beekeepers, and there's lots of states that do that as well. Here in New York State, just last year, they've always had voluntary registration, which is good to be registered. It's good to do that so that the state can kind of monitor for contagious outbreaks of different diseases. But last year they actually changed the law and made it mandatory. So if you're a New York State beekeeper, no matter where you are in the state, you do have to register your hives with the state. There's no fees involved. It's a completely free registration, and this is to provide numbers for the state apiarist to take those and number one, monitor for those diseases going around in case there's any American foul brood or European foul brood or anything that's more serious. They want to know about where it happens, when it happens, so they can monitor and let other beekeepers in the area know what's going on. The other thing is that without data, there's no way for them to go to Albany and ask for more money for different things. And this is money to have additional apiary inspectors. I think currently New York State has about 4 apiary inspectors, and a much smaller state like Massachusetts, they have several times that number for their state. And for the whole of New York State, which is a huge state, there are only 4 apiary inspectors. So the only way that they can go and get a bigger budget to do more services for beekeepers is if they know how many beekeepers that they're serving. So it's a great thing here in New York State. Again, there's no fee to do it. They're not coming out to be Big Brother and check in on you or everything, but it's good, no matter where you are, it's good to check in and see if your city, county, or your state has any specific requirements to be registered or to check out, anything like that. And Florida does have, I believe they do have a state registration that you have to do. And it's great to have like a relationship with the inspector that comes out to check your hives, because they're the ones who are going to be reaching out to you if there's any issues with hives around you. You can pick up really great tips from them. You can, I don't know, I've had nothing but positive experiences with our inspectors, and I think generally, it's a good thing for them to know you and for you to know them. I don't know what kind of services that they offer in Florida or other states around, but I do know here in New York State, if we have any doubts of disease, so if I go to one of my hives and I feel like, you know what, this is not looking good, this looks like it could be, it could be one of the foul broods, it could be something else, I can actually call them up. They will come out for free. They'll bring a test kit. They'll do everything to check the hive, let me know if there's anything I should be doing better, let me know what's going on, and if there are any issues that I need to follow up on. So anyway, that's my little soapbox about registering your hives and being part of that. I know there's lots of arguments against it, and maybe you're in a state where they charge a lot of money, or they're taking advantage of the power. But if you're a New York State beekeeper, there's none of that. So I highly recommend just following the law and registering your hive and actually enjoying the benefits of that, rather than rather than being an outlier and not registering. So I think for this month, we're gonna end it there. If you do have any other questions, you can always comment on these videos. I do see the comments, and I do try to get in and answer any questions that I see. You can reach out to me at NYC Beekeeper on Instagram, on TikTok, on Facebook, pretty much on all the social media platforms. And reach out and let me know. If you have questions, if you just want to let me know about your bees, I love to talk about bees all day, every day. So let me know, and we'll have a chat. But thank you for joining today. Like I said, we're going to cut it off a little short tonight, but we will be back on the 3rd Thursday of the month next month. I haven't even looked to see what date that is, but you can always check back here. 3rd Thursday of the month, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I will see you next month. Thank you very much. Take care.